I know that yesterday we left off with Joel Ford, and we were in the middle of Mr. Patterson's cross-examination of Mr. Ford, but as I understood it, he was not going to be able to be here today. I know that at the end of the day, Mr. Brockman, you may have been the one who told me that um, you'd like to introduce some exhibits from his testimony. And I told you that I would allow you to do that first thing this morning. And so would you like to proceed with that at this point before we call our next witness?
Your Honors, having reflected on that, I think we'll defer until Mr. Ford's testimony is completed and move the exhibits in at that time.
Okay, that sounds fine. Are you ready then, Ms. Riggs, to call your next witness?
Yes, Your Honors. I'll be doing the direct, and plaintiffs would call Senator Gladys Robinson.
Okay. Can we let Gladys Robinson into the courtroom? Ms. Robinson, are you able to hear me?
Now I can hear you, yes.
Okay, great. And I can hear you fine as well. Before we go any further, who will be cross-examining this witness for the legislative defendants?
Ms. Moss will, Your Honor.
Okay, and for the state defendant?
Paul Cox.
Thank you, Mr. Cox. All right, Ms. Robinson, if you would please. Well, is there anything else before we proceed with her testimony? Anything else from anyone? No.
Nothing for plaintiffs.
Okay. Ms. Robinson, if you would please, can you raise your right hand? All right, Madam Clerk, if you would please swear in the witness.
Okay. Do you solemnly affirm that your testimony to the court will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and this is your solemn affirmation?
Yes.
You can lower your hand.
Ms. Riggs, you may proceed.
Good morning, Senator Robinson. Can you please state your full name for the court?
Yes, I am Senator Dr. Gladys A. Robinson.
Where do you currently live, Senator?
I live at 3 Jacobs Way, Greensboro, North Carolina, 27455.
How long have you lived in Greensboro?
I have lived in Greensboro approximately 54 years.
And what's your current occupation?
I am I call it volunteer legislator for the state of North Carolina.
Did you have any other employment before you became a volunteer state legislator?
Certainly I did. I have worked in health and human services for 45 years. I directed aging programs for 10 years, and for 35 years, I ran a community health nonprofit.
Do you have any college or postgraduate degrees?
I do. I am a graduate for the undergraduate degree from Bennett College, received my master's and my doctorate in leadership studies from North Carolina A&T State University, and additional certifications in health from UCLA.
During the course of your career, have you held positions that allowed you to build relationships with your constituents in Guilford County?
Oh, I certainly have.
Can you describe some of those for the court, please?
Well, actually, my relationships in Guilford County started as a student at Bennett College. And I was involved in the 60s, latter 60s, with local organizations as the Greensboro Association of Poor People, NAACP, et cetera, as we were registering African Americans to vote and educating them about the voting process soon after the bill to allow African Americans to vote. So I was deeply involved in that process, which also was the time when we worked on former Supreme Court Justices Henry Fry's campaign and got him elected to the state legislature as the first African American since Reconstruction.
Have you ever had any role with officiating or administering elections in Guilford County?
Yes, I have.
What was that?
I served as a chief precinct judge for Pleasant Garden, PG1, for several years, about 6 or 8 years, I can't remember, late 90s to sometime in the mid 2000s, and was chief over that particular precinct in Guilford County.
What year were you first elected as a senator?
I was elected in 2010 and began my service in 2011.
So how many terms now have you served as a senator?
I am currently in my 6th term as a state senator for District 28.
What geographic area does your district, Senate District 28, cover?
Well, currently my district covers, we call it a pie shape, a donut shape in Greensboro, which is most of Greensboro proper. District 28 has changed 3 times, or is it twice? I've moved 3 times, so I can't remember. But I've been redistricted several times. And so currently it serves Greensboro proper as an urban community.
Why did you decide to run for the Senate in 2010?
Well, I have been involved in my community advocating for the rights of people who are ignored or underserved, left out of the process since even prior to going to college, coming from Georgia, which was segregated as I grew up, and African Americans did not have rights. So I have been involved my entire life, from my grandparents on. And during my time in Greensboro, I have remained involved in the community, helping people with advocating for people who were low wage garbage workers and cafeteria workers, for students, to make sure we had equal access in schools. As we had 3 separate school districts, I served on the steering committee for merging 3 school systems in Guilford County because they were unequally funded. I served on the first Closing the Achievement Gap Commission under Senator Bill Martin for the state of North Carolina. And I have been involved in multiple issues, whether it's wages, whether it's rights to vote, whether it's access to jobs, in Guilford County for my entire life that I've been here.
How would you describe your relationship with your constituents?
I feel, based on responses from them, that I meet their expectations, more than meet their expectations in representing them. I'm still involved in a lot of organizations, including my own church and Sunday school, and I get regular feedback from members, whether in grocery stores or walking or wherever I am, that they appreciate the service I'm doing and representing them. I even get questions about what is going on recently with voter ID or with whatever, we're going to face that again. So I feel the citizens I represent have confidence in me, and that I speak for them.
And understanding that your district has changed a bit over the last decade, do you know approximately the Black voting age percentage of your district?
Yes, based on the 2018 data, about 42% of District 28 is the Black voter age population.
As a member of the Senate, Senator Robinson, are you a member of any legislative caucuses?
Yes. As a member of the Senate, I participate in the Senate Democratic Caucus, the Legislative Black Caucus as well.
And how many terms have you been a member of each of those caucuses?
I have been a member, an active member, my entire time, which is six terms, going to 6 terms.
What is the mission of the Legislative Black Caucus?
Well, the mission of the Legislative Black Caucus, where I now serve as vice chair, is to educate, to advocate, and to address policy issues that disparagingly affect or impact people of color in the state, all of the issues that may not be addressed right now in policy or may be addressed to the detriment of people of color in our state. And so we operate in terms of looking at statutes, legislation, hearing from citizens, and advocating on their behalf, as well as attempting to make policy when we can get some support to get that legislation on the books.
Senator Robinson, in appearing today, are you waiving your legislative privilege?
I am only waiving in terms of addressing the voter ID bill and for myself, no one else.
And that's Senate Bill 824?
Yes.
Are you waiving the legislative privilege that any of your legislative colleagues may have as you understand it?
No, I do not have that authority, and I'm not speaking for anyone else.
Senator Robinson, are you familiar with the Covington versus North Carolina redistricting case?
Yes, I am.
And understanding that you're not an attorney, can you explain what you understood the gist of that case to be about?
Well, and I am not an attorney, but what I do remember is that that case was specifically about redistricting, and it addressed the fact that several of our districts, including mine, were gerrymandered and packed African Americans in so that actually they had less influence in other districts across the state.
Do you remember what happened in June of 2018 in the federal redistricting Covington case?
Yes, my recollection is that the federal courts ruled that these districts, several in Guilford County and a couple other counties, I think, were unfairly gerrymandered and that those districts had to be redrawn. My district was one of those.
What did you believe the political implications would be for non-racially gerrymandered districts being in place for the 2018 elections?
Well, based on the statistics that we had looked at, actually the redrawing of those districts, which also happened to mine, would allow for fairly distributing the population in those districts so that they would have influence in other districts rather than being packed totally in, which would probably result in fewer Republican districts and a chance for fairer Democratic districts.
Do you have any basis for believing this understanding was widely shared?
Well, my opinion is that based on the legislation in June and what happened as a result in terms of the whole voter ID issue in terms of becoming an issue for constitutional amendment, was an attempt to make sure that the Republicans would not lose their supermajority, which they had, or would be able to get some things done prior to then.
Senator Robinson, I want to ask you a few questions now about the voter ID constitutional amendment. First, do you review election result data from your district?
I do to some extent. I have some other people who assist me with that since I'm not an expert.
Have you had the opportunity to review how much support the voter ID constitutional amendment got in your district?
Yes, I did.
And what was that?
Actually, the citizens I represented voted against the voter ID 2-1.
Senator Robinson, I'd now like to first talk to you about the legislative process surrounding Senate Bill 824 and your experience as a senator during its passage. Did you participate in the legislative process for Senate Bill 824?
I did not in terms of developing 824.
Were you there for the votes?
I was.
And based on your experience, how would you characterize the Senate debate that took place around Senate Bill 824?
Well, my feeling is that it was a very rushed process. I am not a part of either of the committees, the election committee, et cetera, but the bill was introduced on, I believe, Tuesday night, the 27th, and it was on the floor the day of the 28th, where it did have some amendments, debate, et cetera. And it passed third reading on the 29th. And for a important legislation like this that affects the rights of people, I consider that an extremely rushed process.
What kind of legislative activities would be hallmarks of a non-rushed process on a bill of this nature?
Well, my reference goes back to the redistricting process, which of course wasn't good for me. It was difficult, but it did allow for much more citizen input, both in committees and on the in legislative committees, as well as throughout the community across North Carolina, where citizens could come and view the data, view the maps, what the issues might be, ask questions. So that was a real important issue, and comparatively, this legislation got little or nothing.
Senator Robinson, as we talk a little bit more about the timeline of Senate Bill 824, I'm going to show you what has been marked and previously admitted as Joint Exhibit 476, the legislative history of Senate Bill 824. Can you see the document on the screen, Senator Robinson?
Yes, I can.
And have you seen this document before?
Yes, I have.
All right. And then Ashley, if you'll scroll to the bottom, I think you covered this by date, but Senator Robinson, oh wait, there we go. Keep scrolling. There we go. Senator Robinson, how long was Senate Bill 824 in the Senate before it went to the House?
Approximately a day and not quite a half, but a day and a half.
And how are you calculating that?
Well, I'm looking at when the bill passed first reading. That means it was introduced on the 27th, which was an evening. And then it was on the floor probably for several hours on the 28th. And then it passed second reading on the 28th. And the very next day, it passed third reading.
And Ashley, if you can scroll up, how long was Senate Bill 824 in the Senate after the bill came back from the House? Scroll up a little bit more. Up a little bit more. There you go.
Okay, so it came back on the 5th and was placed on our calendar on the 6th. And it was ordered and rolled on the 6th. Actually, that's less than a full day.
So how long did the Senate consider this bill in total?
I would estimate a maximum of 2 days or 2.5 days.
Sorry, Ashley, if you can scroll back down, I want to where the amendments are. Senator Robinson, do you see when amendments were offered when the bill was first in the Senate?
That's House. Do you
Scroll down a
want-
little bit more, Ashley. There we go.
Yes, I do.
How many days were amendments considered in the Senate?
1 day on November 28th.
And then do you see on November 28th, the history shows a motion to table the bill failed?
Yes.
Can you tell me about that motion to table?
Well, my recollection is that Senator Woodard, one of our colleagues, actually gave some explanation about the speed with which this bill was moving and the need to get input and issues surrounding the entire bill. And so he made a motion to table the bill to give it additional time for that kind of input and discussion.
Did you vote in favor to table the bill?
Sure, yes.
What kind of legislative activities would tabling the bill have allowed for?
Well, tabling the bill would actually, when you table the bill, it doesn't, you can't bring that particular bill back up for discussion because if it's tabled and voted on, that's what happens. But it does not mean that another kind of amended bill after citizen input, discussion, et cetera, even bipartisan work could not come forth sometime later and look at a similar issue.
Would this have allowed you more time to collect information from voters?
Yes, I believe it would have.
Senator, you mentioned that good process on a bill of this nature would entail consideration, I think, in committees. Can you tell us about the committees that Senate Bill 824 went through in the Senate?
Well, of course, it went to rules, which decides where a bill goes after that. And then it went to the select committees on elections and back to rules. So it didn't, based on this calendar, didn't go any further.
Were you in either of these committee meetings?
No, I was not.
How, if at all, was this different from your previous experience with committee consideration of important bills?
Normally, on important bills, we make an attempt to get even to those committees to hear, and sometimes we can participate, but sometimes you cannot if you're not on the committee. However, there were very few members of our Democratic caucus who were at that committee meeting. And I was not a part of it to hear any of the discussion.
Turning then to the amendments on Senate Bill 824, Senator Robinson, did you introduce any amendments to Senate Bill 824?
No, I did not.
Why not?
Our process for our caucus, to which I agree and support, entails deciding what issues we should choose to address, and who will best represent those issues or present those. And so we discussed the amendments and we developed a an agreement on who would represent those. I was not one of those individuals, which, you know, I agreed to.
Did you have input in the amendments offered?
I did in caucus.
Looking generally at all of the amendments on the screen here, what can you tell us about the amendment process in the Senate for Senate Bill 824?
Well, if you mean the order or most of those, you can see the first 3 or 4 passed, which probably were technical corrections or simple kinds of things that had to be done normally. With those amendments, they are just corrections to the bill. But
Were amendments tabled?
About 3 of those, 1, 2, 3, 4 of the amendments, 5 were tabled.
Okay. And Ashley, now if you can take down Joint Exhibit 476, Senator Robinson, I'm going to show you what has been marked and previously admitted as Joint Exhibit 645. Senator Robinson, can you tell us which amendment this is?
This is amendment number A1.
And who offered this amendment?
Senator Joel Ford.
What party is he associated with?
Senator Ford was a Democrat.
Did then Senator Ford have some sponsorship role with Senate Bill 824?
Yes, Senator Ford was one of the 3 sponsors of Senate Bill 824, along with 2 Republicans.
And do you recall what this amendment did?
Well, actually, the amendment did not do a lot, except it said that the people could continue to receive voter ID cards anytime except at the end of one-stop voting for primary and election day itself. So it extended the period a bit.
Okay. Did you vote for this amendment?
Yes.
And
It made sense.
And was this amendment adopted?
Yes, it was.
Do you know why then Senator Ford, a co-sponsor of the bill, didn't just put this in the bill to begin with?
I do not know. I sort of postured that it was simply a political move because it could have been included as he helped to develop the entire bill itself.
All right, I'm now going to show you what has been marked and previously admitted as JX 639. And we'll zoom in on that. Senator Robinson, can you tell us which amendment this is?
This is Amendment A7 by Senator Terry Van Dyne.
And who offered this amendment? Oh, sorry, by Terry Van Dyne.
Sorry.
No, that's what party is Senator Van Dyne associated with?
She was a Democrat. She is a Democrat.
Okay. Do you recall what this amendment did?
If I recollect, she moved to extend the time for boards of elections so that they would have ample time to actually, since this was a fast-moving piece of legislation, costs hadn't been considered, et cetera. There were going to have to be a lot of changes made at boards of elections. So she, if I remember correctly, suggested that we move the date to July 1 to give those boards enough time to get procedures in place for this. And then I believe I can't remember the latter part of 19 and 20 what that had to do with. I think it's
would,
something about.
would it refresh your recollection if we looked at Senator Van Dyne's explanation of this amendment?
It would.
Okay, Ashley, can you go to Joint Exhibit 772, page 20, it's page 8 of the big exhibit, but it's a mini transcript, so it's page 29 through 30 lines. And then Senator, looking at what Senator Van Dyne said in particular, page 30, lines 5 through 10.
Okay.
If you'll read that to yourself and let me know if that refreshes your recollection about what the second part of the Van Dyne amendment does.
Okay, now I do remember. The second part of her amendment would extend the reasonable impediment period an additional year. And in the bill, there was introduced a list of reasonable impediments by which voters who did not have IDs could indicate a reason for not and vote provisionally. And she recommended that that be extended for an additional year, considering the fact that there might be municipal elections or people may not vote at all during that first year, so that they would not have to go through the same process again.
And to clarify, was the law that not knowing about voter ID was a reasonable impediment for 2019?
I don't understand your question. What?
Looking at Senator Van Dyne's comments, was not knowing about the voter ID law a reasonable impediment in 2019?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, she indicated she felt that.
Okay, and Ashley, you can take this down and put the amendment back up. Senator Robinson, would this amendment have helped voters avoid disenfranchisement?
Yes, I believe it would have, by extending time, would have given time for education, informing voters, helping them through the process of what all of this meant, since it actually changed their ability to be able to vote.
Was this amendment debated?
It was debated to a limited extent, but it was actually tabled. Once it's tabled, you cannot debate it anymore.
Okay. All right, Ashley, you can take that down now. Senator, I'm now going to show you what has been marked and previously admitted as JX 638. Senator Robinson, can you tell us which amendment this is?
This is amendment number A8.
And who offered this amendment?
Senator Paul Lohr for Forsyth County.
Okay, what party is Senator Lowe associated with?
He is a Democrat.
And do you know what race Senator Lowe identifies as?
Yes, he's an African-American male.
Do you recall what this amendment would have done?
Yes, I do. This amendment would have allowed for the voters to be able to vote the last Saturday prior to the election, in terms of one-stop voting, which has enabled a lot of voters in our community to be able to get to the polls. So this would have extended the early election one-stop voting time.
And when you say our community, to what community are you referring?
I'm speaking of African Americans predominantly.
Would this amendment have helped voters avoid disenfranchisement?
I believe it would have, because my history is that in the communities that I've worked in for so many years, people take the opportunity to organize groups of folk, whether it's churches, community organizations, based on people's schedules, etc. Even if and take that last Saturday and really get to the polls. It's a push for people to be able to exercise their rights and to get to the polls. So it's been a major day that our communities count on.
Was this amendment accepted, Senator Robinson?
No, this amendment was tabled as well.
Ashley, you can take that down. Senator Robinson, I'm now going to show you what has been marked and previously admitted as JX 637. Senator Robinson, can you tell us which amendment this is?
This is Amendment A11.
Okay. And do you recall what who offered this amendment?
Senator Ben Clark. Ben Clark.
Okay. And do you recall what this amendment did?
Well, the amendment simply said what probably most boards of elections typically do in terms of making voter education materials and information available, and that they would have to put on that information if a person can vote, what you have to have when voting in person, which traditionally is on information that comes from our boards of elections.
Okay. Do you have any reason to believe that the State Board of Elections, at least as currently comprised, was not going to do this education anyway?
No, I have no reason to believe that they would not do that.
Okay. Was this amendment adopted?
Yes.
Ashley, you can take that down, and will you put up now JX 637? I may have mislabeled this. I'm looking for Amendment 10, so maybe it was 636. There we go. Thank you, Ashley. Senator Robinson, can you tell us what amendment this is?
This is Amendment A10.
And do you recall what this amendment did?
Yes. This is an amendment by Senator Floyd McKissick, who was from Durham, a Democrat, and his amendment simply said that 90 days prior to the expirations, the Board of Elections had to notify anyone with a voter ID card that it would expire. And I don't remember what the 60 to 100 days is, but it's typically what boards of elections do based on their own procedures.
Okay. You can take that down, Ashley. Senator Robinson, how would you characterize amendments 10 and 11 that we just looked at compared to amendments 7 and 8, which we were tabled and discussed earlier?
Well, I believe that amendments 10 and 11 were technical at most, or things that should have been in the bill anyway, or that boards would do, which are important, but not things that, not as consequential as the amendments that were tabled. The amendments that were tabled were intended to keep people from being disenfranchised from the vote. were intended to expand opportunity as opposed to limiting. And so I think that the ones that were tabled were those that made a difference to the lives of folks who want to vote.
Senator Robinson, in debate on the floor in the Senate, did any of your colleagues put members of the Senate on notice that Senate Bill 824 would be likely to disenfranchise voters of color?
Yes. In particular, Senator Erica Smith, who represented 9, I believe, low wealth counties that are comprised mostly of African Americans, made a very passionate plea on the floor that this bill was really going to discriminate against or disenfranchise the voters in her area and across the state as well.
Did any changes made to Senate Bill 824 in response to that information shared by Senator Smith fully address this effect on Black voters?
I don't feel that they did. I don't believe they did any changes.
Senator Robinson, based on your decade in the North Carolina General Assembly, would you characterize the process by which Senate Bill 824 was enacted into law as bipartisan?
No, I would not, even though the bill had 2 Republicans and a Democrat. I don't consider that bipartisan because it did not have bipartisan discussion, bipartisan development, or input.
Do you have any examples of laws that actually were bipartisan?
Well, being in the minority party, it doesn't happen a lot. However, I have had a couple of opportunities to encourage and engage a couple of senators to work with me. I worked with them. One was the breast cancer bill that actually was my bill, but we Senator Pate, a Republican, who's I think had some experiences, agreed to work with me on it, and he was a key sponsor, but we got it done. It was a bipartisan effort, had community input from groups around the state who were interested in breast density screening, and it's law now. And the other was the opioid Naloxone bill to prevent deaths from people who overdose on the streets or wherever, so that they would be able to have that medication injected to prevent that. And Senator Davis, Jim Davis, and I worked on that legislation together and have presented on that.
What about those laws made them bipartisan in your experience?
Well, I consider that when we have similar kinds of concerns from our communities and we're able to discuss those and engage those citizens to see what are their concerns, how we might be able to fix either the law or address the issue, and we develop legislation around that, and we come to some agreement. And that's what was done, along with some outside experts, of course, in the medical area. But that's what was done with these bills, and they have served, I believe, our community and our state well.
Now, shifting gears a little bit, Senator, do you recall comments that Senator McKissick made on the floor of the Senate before third reading?
Yes, in general.
Okay, and what was the general gist of those comments?
Well, in Senator McKissick's usual style, he express his appreciation to the sponsor, bill sponsors, and the Republicans for working on the legislation, and indicated that it wasn't perfect, it wasn't what he ideally would want, but understood that it had to move forward. But that's his usual, my experience with his usual gentleman manner of handling things.
And I'm obviously not asking you what was in Senator McKissick's mind, but based on your experience, do comments like that suggest that the bill was bipartisan?
No. And usually my experience with Senator McKissick, it doesn't mean that. It just as an overture of grace.
Did Senator
And-
McKissick, oh, I'm sorry, did I interrupt
No,
you?
no, I'm done.
Did Senator McKissick ultimately vote against the bill?
Yes, he did.
How many Democrats in the Senate voted to override the governor's veto of Senate Bill 824?
I believe all of, well, there were two that voted for the bill, but all of the Democrats voted to sustain the veto. I think. I need to look at that. I can't remember, but I know two Democrats voted for the legislation, but they later voted to sustain the veto.
Did Senator Joel Ford continue to support the bill even after the governor?
Yes, he continued to support it. I missed one.
Was he the only Democrat to vote to sustain the veto in the Senate?
Yeah, he was the only one voted to override the veto.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Only Democrat who voted to override the veto.
Thank you. I misspoke. How did you ultimately vote on Senate Bill 824, Senator?
I voted against 824.
And why?
I voted against 824 for a lot of reasons, some which are historical, ancestral, etc. I mentioned that I grew up in Georgia in during segregation, and my history with my grandparents, parents, etc., were histories where African Americans did not have access to the vote, did not have rights. And we, along with my church that we were involved in, helped to desegregate buses. We were involved for a very long time in terms of trying to get African Americans to vote. Even my grandfathers, who were over churches, helped organize and educate people. My grandmother educated folks. So, but even then, schools were segregated. So my history is, and my family history is one of advocating and working for the rights of our people. And I came to Bennett College with that same sense of what we have to do to get folks elected and to change the laws. And we worked on that at Bennett and had to, well, actually in the community, it wasn't Bennett. It was organizations all around in the community organizing and helping folk looking at those issues. So the whole issue of discrimination against a sector of people because of skin color has impacted what is going on and what continues to go on in society. And it has, my feeling, it has nothing to do with intellect. It has to do with opportunity. It has to do with access. Voter rights are access issues. And they have been tackled. They have been denied and knocked down at every opportunity. And I, during my years on this earth, have seen that constantly. learned it from my grandparents, but I have seen it and I've worked through it in every entity, whether it's in schools, whether it's in businesses, or whether it's on the Senate floor, where sometimes slanders are made based on race and that kind of thing. And I, as an African American woman, really take exception to what is going on. And so I vote my conscience, I vote my experiences, and I vote for the people that I feel don't have the loud voice to be heard.
Based on your experience, Senator Robinson, will the reasonable impediment provision in Senate Bill 824 prevent voters from being disenfranchised?
I don't believe it will. I think first, as a person who was a chief judge at a precinct, our voters don't understand reasonable impediment. If they don't understand a provisional ballot, and I can tell you a lot of them didn't, if they don't understand it, they don't understand reasonable impediment. If you ask the average person. And then as you list those things, they are not comprehensive in terms of covering why, that you can even say why I can't get a voter ID card, why I can't get this. And then I vote provisional. Does my vote count? There are a lot of barriers. It's not a matter of whether people are ignorant. It's a matter of how the information is not shared adequately and how the barriers are set up to keep them from being able to access opportunity.
What about the quote unquote free ID from county boards of elections provision of Senate Bill 824? Do you believe that will keep voters from being disenfranchised?
I don't think that a free ID is an answer or will help because the free ID, you have to get to the place to get the free ID. So you've got to take some kind of documentation with you and know what that is. So I don't think that makes it, if you can get there, yeah, you can get a free ID. But first you've got to get there. You've got to get off from work. You've got to overcome a lot of barriers to make sure you can access that.
Senator, we've mentioned his name a couple of times, but are you familiar with former Senator Joel Ford?
Yes, I am.
And how did you come to be acquainted with him?
Well, I actually met Senator Ford through former Senator Dannelly, who was in the Senate when I went and whom I respect a lot. And Senator Dannelly, upon saying he would retire, indicated to me he had a young man he was recommending to take a seat and wanted me to meet him and to mentor him.
And when he joined the Senate, how would you characterize your relationship to Mr. Ford?
Well, when Senator Ford joined the Senate, he followed up as Senator Dannelly had suggested, and I did too. And we formed a great working relationship. He would ask questions, we'd talk about issues. We would talk about policy issues that affected our communities, which were very similar during that time.
Did your relationship with then Senator Ford change over time?
Yes, it did.
How so?
Well, after a few years, Senator Ford appeared to separate himself or pull away from those of us in the Democratic Senate caucus from me, and also appeared less at caucus meetings and did not engage As a matter of fact, he oftentimes we would go to dinner in the afternoon, bunches of us, but he did not participate in those kinds of gatherings, but he did go with other colleagues on the other side of the aisle.
How would you describe Mr. Ford's interaction with the Legislative Black Caucus?
Well, Senator Ford was not involved with the Legislative Black Caucus. He did not engage a lot. Initially, he may have gone to a meeting or two, but he did not come to meetings or discuss legislation he planned to introduce with the caucus.
When Mr. Ford lost the Democratic primary in the spring of 2018, did you observe anything that led you to believe at the time that Mr. Ford was upset by losing the primary?
Well, I can't pinpoint issues, but I can say his general demeanor was not coming to caucus, not being a part of, and also he seemed to have aligned himself with a new group of individuals who felt, and he did express this, as a matter of fact, that they were not
Objection, Your Honor.
pleased.
All right, give me 1 second. The objection's overruled. You may answer the question.
Okay. That they were not pleased with the direction of the Democratic caucus. And so he felt the need to go in another direction.
And now, without waiving the personal legislative privilege of your colleagues that you wish to respect, I want to ask you a few questions. Do the House and Senate Democratic caucuses meet together?
No, we do not traditionally.
And in your experience, have you, as a member of the Senate Democratic Caucus, ever been directed to take legislative action by the House Democratic Caucus?
No, that does not happen.
And again, with respecting your stated position on legislative privilege, were you motivated in your votes and action on Senate Bill 824 to limit discussion or input on the bill?
No, I was not. I participated in our caucus in a deliberative process where we decided what that process would be. No.
And would the amendments that your caucus members offered that were tabled actually have expanded discussion on the bill if they'd been allowed to be fully debated?
Yes, I believe they would have, those 3 or 4 that were tabled.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have thank you, Senator Robinson. Your Honors, I have no further questions and pass the witness.
All right, Ms. Moss, you may cross-examine the witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Senator Robinson. My name is Nicole Moss, and I'm one of the attorneys representing the legislative defendants. And I appreciate your being here this morning, and I have a few questions for you.
Okay.
During your time in the General Assembly, and I believe you said you were elected first in 2010, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. So since that time in 2010, you have never been a member of a legislative committee that deals with election issues. Is that right?
That's correct.
And you have never been and are not currently a member of the Joint Legislative Elections Oversight Committee. Is that right?
That's correct.
And during your direct testimony, when you were providing information on Senate Bill 824, you have no background or knowledge on what went on in the Joint Legislative Elections Oversight Committee before the bill was placed on the floor of the Senate. Is that right?
I have no background or knowledge, but there are recordings of the meetings.
Okay. You did not personally go to the joint Legislative Elections Oversight Committee hearing on November 26th. Is that right?
No, I think it was November 27th, wasn't it?
You don't know the date when that occurred?
It was listed on the calendar on the 27th.
Okay. Is it your understanding that the exhibit that Ms. Riggs showed to you was a complete set of all of the committees through which Senate Bill 824 went? Or was it only those committees after the law was filed in the Senate?
Objection mischaracterizes the evidence in the record. Senate Bill, there may have been a draft of a bill, but Senate Bill 824 didn't exist until filed on the 27th.
Just 1 second. The objection's overruled. You may answer the question.
Based on the transcript, and that's the same one I saw on the General Assembly website, the bill was filed on the 27th, and until a bill is filed, it cannot go to rules or any committee.
Okay. So as we sit here today, do you have any knowledge as to whether an early draft of the bill, whether it was named 824 or not, whether an early draft of that bill was considered by the Joint Legislative Elections Oversight Committee?
Based on information from my colleagues who were on that, no, I did not hear that that was an earlier draft of a bill.
Okay. And you are not a member of that committee, correct? So would you defer to a member of the committee regarding their testimony on that topic?
I can't speak for them, but I'm telling you what I saw and what was, what I saw.
Okay. You can't recall during your time in the General Assembly sponsoring or co-sponsoring any bills related to election issues, is that right?
I can recall one bill that I introduced on literacy a couple of years ago. Of course, when you introduce them as a minority, it gets to rules and it sits, it goes in the trash. But I did on the literacy law and the Constitution, along with some other senators.
Okay, and you consider that bill to be an election-related bill?
I certainly do.
Okay. And when do you recall being asked at your deposition whether you had ever sponsored or co-sponsored any bills related to election issues?
I don't remember. I may have been, and I did not remember that one. I don't remember.
Okay. If at your deposition you said you didn't remember, did you do anything between your deposition and now to refresh your recollection?
Actually, I thought about it as you were speaking, and the literacy issues and those things in the Constitution that are bad. And I remember that.
Okay. I want to turn your attention now to the legislative process that you've spoken to on direct. You are not aware of any Senate rules that were in effect in 2018 that were violated in the process of enacting Senate Bill 824. Is that right?
No, I am not. I'm not looking at the book, though.
Okay. But as we sit here, is there any rule that you can identify, whether by substance or number, that you believe was violated in the passage of Senate Bill 824?
I'm not aware of any rule. Process maybe, but not rule.
And do you know the average time it takes for a bill to go through the legislative process in the North Carolina General Assembly?
I can't give you an average. I can give you my experience based on the magnitude of the law and the kind of discussion we normally have.
And isn't it true that in your experience, every bill that has become law during your tenure in the Senate has not received public comment?
I don't understand your question.
Sure. Isn't it true that not every bill that's gone through the Senate during your tenure in the Senate since 2010, not every bill that has passed has received public comment?
Over a decade of bills that have been mostly Republican led, you are correct.
And in terms of the public comment for the voter ID bill, did you review any of the written public comments that were submitted?
The only comments that I received during that day were from some of my constituents that came directly to me from the NAACP and those groups that found out about it, and we talked. But the others that you're referring to, no.
Okay. Do you know how many individuals submitted public comments during the Joint Elections Oversight Committee hearing on November 26th?
No, I don't.
Do you know whether there were any individuals who sought to speak at that hearing that were denied?
I do not. I only know what Senator Krawiec said on the floor.
Do you know how many hours of debate Senate Bill 824 went through on the floor of the Senate?
I don't know, but I could approximate based on that calendar, and I was there.
Okay. And do you know what the average amount of time a bill is debated on the floor of the Senate?
Yes, I do. A bill of that magnitude, we have spent the entire day, which might start at 3 or 4 into the late evening and continued the next day. A bill of that magnitude can go on we can adjourn, we can go to the community, we can have committees that go, like in redistricting, we came to Greensboro, to GTCC, had an extensive time to talk to citizens, went back to committee, had public comment. Bills of this magnitude can have extensive public comment.
But again, you don't know, you can't, as we sit here today, state what the normal average time is for a bill to go through debate in the Senate in North Carolina, correct?
The voter ID bill is not a normal bill.
And Senator,
no, it is my comparison, if you're asking me my opinion, my comparison is to another bill like redistricting that is of similar magnitude, not a traditional kind of issue. And that's my comparison.
and I appreciate that, Senator. And to be clear, I'm not asking your opinion. I'm simply asking you, without characterizing a bill, do you know the average time that a bill goes through debate on the Senate floor in the Senate?
And I am saying to you that unless you can show me the record, that there is no normal time, average time.
Now, you discussed the fact that the amendments that were offered on the Senate floor were those that were agreed to in caucus. Is that right?
If you mean by the Democrats?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
And that would include that the caucus decided to offer the two amendments that you classified as simple, the one from Senator McKissick and the one from Senator Clark. Is that right?
Oh, yes.
And And then you also talked about, well, actually strike that before I ask you that question. Were there any additional amendments in the caucus that were discussed but determined not to offer?
I don't, well, I don't have to share that with you. I can share with you what I agreed to and what we agreed to.
So you didn't have any additional amendments that you chose to offer on the floor of the Senate, is that right?
I chose to discuss and enter and recommend for the people who were introducing the amendments on the floor. I participated, yes.
But if there were additional amendments to the bill that you thought could have made it a better bill, you had the opportunity to offer those amendments, correct?
You are supposing that something occurred. I'm not saying that it did. I'm saying that I participated in a participatory process by which we discussed the issues that would be presented, and we, including me, agreed on who would do those.
And so if no other amendments were offered by the Democrats, that was a decision that was made by the caucus.
That was a decision, yeah, we made them collectively.
I'd like to turn your attention to, I believe it's Amendment 7, and that would be JX 639. If we could bring that up on the screen, I would appreciate it. Senator Robinson, can you see the document on your screen?
Yes, I do.
And this is the amendment that was tabled, Amendment A7, that was offered by Senator Van Dyne that was tabled, correct?
Yes.
Isn't it true that in addition to moving the date back by which the county boards of elections would have to comply with the voter ID law, it would then move back the date by which the county boards of elections would be able to offer free voter photo ID cards?
I believe so, but I need to look at that.
And if that is in fact the case, that would have delayed by a year the time in which voters in North Carolina that lacked a form of ID that would qualify to vote could obtain that ID from their county board of elections, correct?
Objection, misstates the evidence.
Give me just 1 second. The objection's overruled.
So would you pull that language up and so that I'm sure of what you're saying? I can't recite it from looking at the amendment, so I need to see it.
I'm sorry, so you're saying as you're looking at this amendment that you testified about earlier, you're not sure what its effect would have been on the voter ID cards offered by the county boards of election?
Objection, mischaracterizes prior testimony.
Give me just 1 second.
I am saying,
Oh,
am I to answer that?
Excuse me, just 1 second.
Sorry,
Hold on.
can't hear you.
The objection's overruled. You may answer the question.
I am saying to you that you are not repeating what I said, that I need to see the language or either the recordings from the floor before I can say yes or no to you. That is not what I said. So you need to show me that if you want an answer.
Okay, so Senator Robinson, your earlier testimony on direct about your understanding of what this amendment would accomplish, what was that based on?
It was based on the transcript that I saw, and I indicated to you that indicated to Attorney Riggs that I understood the moving of one piece, but I needed to see the transcript to make sure I could recite what the second line meant.
Fair enough. And so you also testified on direct about your understanding about the free photo IDs. Do you recall those questions?
Yes.
And am I correct that it is that you testified to your understanding that the photo IDs that would be offered by the County Board of Elections would require the voter to provide documentation?
What I said was that I did not believe it addressed the issue because first the voter would have to get there and would have to take whatever documents. I did not say they would have to. I said would have to take whatever documents, which meant generic if there were documents required.
What is your understanding as to whether documents are required to obtain one of the free voter IDs offered by the county boards of election?
I will need to see the language. I don't tend to quote legislation, and I don't tend to have a photographic memory. So I need to have that pulled up.
When Senate Bill 824 was being debated on the floor of the Senate, we've discussed that you did not offer any amendments. Did you offer any statements?
I did not on the floor.
Did you attempt to provide any information on the floor of the Senate to your colleagues regarding the ID possession rates in North Carolina for any citizens, including African Americans?
Would you tell me, rephrase the question? What do you mean on the floor?
Sure. When Senate Bill 824 was being debated on the floor of the Senate, did you offer any information during that debate to your colleagues about ID possession rates of North Carolina voters, including African American voters?
If I did have, and we do have discussion between ourselves, but that is of a confidential nature, and I was not speaking on the floor or to the assembly.
Isn't it true, Senator Robinson, that even if every amendment proposed by the Democrats had been adopted, you still would not have voted for Senate Bill 824?
It is probable, based on my history and my experience, that I probably would not unless major changes are made. The Constitution itself still has a literacy clause. There are things in that Constitution that continue to disenfranchise that I feel as a legislator we need to change to erase some of the discriminatory practices. So there would have to be major work done, and I would be glad to participate. But there would have to be major work for me to vote for a bill, a voter ID bill.
You disagree with the whole premise of voter identification and do not vote for voter identification bills, correct?
Generally, yes, I do.
I'm sorry, when you say yes, I do, just so the record's clear, yes, you do vote for voter identification bills, or yes, you agree that you do not vote for voter identification bills?
I agree that I generally do not vote for voter ID bills.
And you disagree with the whole premise of voter identification, correct?
I disagree with the discriminatory intent of voter ID.
And there's nothing that can be changed in a voter ID law that would encourage you to support it, correct?
I am not sure this testimony is about my change, my support. As a legislator, I will work to make sure that access to voting is available to everyone. The law as it is discriminates, and I will not support that law.
And you were a strong supporter initially of House Bill 1169, which was a bill that provided COVID relief in North Carolina. Is that right?
Objection, Your Honor's relevance. House Bill 1169 was passed over a year and a half after Senate Bill 824, the bill that we are here today about.
The objection is overruled.
I was a major developer of COVID legislation as a person with an extensive health background. And I did work hard on the COVID legislation to make sure that people in our state had the support they needed during this time of pandemics.
And that COVID legislation is what became known as House Bill 1169. Is that right?
Yes.
And you ultimately voted against that legislation that you worked very hard on because it included a provision to add public assistance ID to Senate Bill 824's list of qualifying IDs, correct?
I voted against the bill because a sly provision in that bill was made on voter ID. The bill had nothing to do with that particular provision on voter ID. It was simply about COVID and those issues surrounding COVID that would help our people to continue to maintain their daily living and access. But there was a sly provision in there that I disagreed with.
And do you recall any specific instance in which you have voted against a bill that you otherwise supported because the legislative process had been rushed?
I cannot tell you that. I've been in the Senate for 11 years now, and there are a lot of bills, so I cannot tell you that just by sitting here.
As we sit here today, you do not recall any, is that correct?
I'm saying that I cannot tell you that.
My question is, do you recall any?
And what I'm saying to you at the very moment I'm speaking to you without pre-notice, I cannot tell you that.
Okay. And do you recall being asked that same question at your deposition, whether you recalled ever voting for a bill that you otherwise supported, but because you believed the legislative process had been rushed?
I'm not sure of that specific question, that was a specific question.
Okay. And you don't recall whether you were able to provide an example at your deposition of a bill that you voted against, that you otherwise supported because you believe the legislative process was rushed?
I don't remember providing that.
Senator Robinson, you have not looked at any information that would tell you how many of your constituents excuse me, possess forms of identification that are authorized under Senate Bill 824. Is that right?
No, I have not.
And you don't have any firsthand knowledge of how many registered voters currently have IDs that are acceptable under Senate Bill 824. Is that right?
I do not. I do know the Black voting age population in my district, but I don't know whether they have IDs or not.
And you don't personally know anyone who is registered to vote who lacks an acceptable form of identification under Senate Bill 824, correct?
Would you repeat that?
Sure. You do not personally know anyone who is registered to vote who lacks an acceptable form of identification under Senate Bill 824, correct?
I think it depends on what you call acceptable. I know a lot of people who don't have a driver's license, a lot of people who don't have a federal or state ID, a lot of people who don't have some of those recommended pieces who are registered to vote. I do know a lot of people.
One of the amendments to Senate Bill 824 that you discussed on direct was an amendment that I believe it got tabled, having to do with Saturday voting before the election, early voting on the Saturday before the election. Do you recall that?
Yes, I do.
Now, nothing in Senate Bill 824 prohibited voting on the Saturday before election, did it?
I don't remember all the details, but I do know that there was a period of time defined by which voters could get the ID. So I do know that that was in there. Can't tell you where.
Okay, but in terms of whether or not early voting would be available on the Saturday before election, that was not prohibited. That having early voting on that Saturday was not prohibited by Senate Bill 824, was it?
I believe, and I can't quote it because I don't tend to quote what I can't see there. But I believe that there were pieces in that legislation that were going to actually cut that last Saturday off, and that was the intent of making sure it was available.
Okay, so it's your testimony that you believe that Senate Bill 824 had provisions that would cut off early voting on the Saturday before election.
Objection. I characterize as testimony.
Give me 1 second, please. The objection's overruled. You may answer the question.
Okay. I said that I believe that there were provisions in 824 that were going to limit the early voting period. And so that's why the Saturday was introduced. That's what I said.
Okay.
All right, let me interject, Ms. Moss. I apologize. It's now 11 o'clock. Time for our morning break. We're going to take about a 15-minute break at this point. We'll come back at 11:15. Thank you all. We'll see you at 11:15.